Tommy Jaggi of Fansided here with NFL expert Marcus Mosher on the No Huddle show on Stacking the Box. Marcus, I was out last week. You had Chad Rudder on to talk NFL draft. And of course, I leave for vacation and all this goes down. George Pickens is traded to the Dallas Cowboys, which ironically, I'm a Steelers fan. You're a Cowboys fan. We're going to talk about that in just a second here. Derek Carr retires. And we get news on the NFL season opener. So let's start with the latter, Marcus. The Cowboys and the Eagles are set to face off in the 2025 season opener. Now, I got to preface with this. I'm not a fan of putting pivotal divisional games in week one. It's such a fluky week of the NFL season. And knowing that that game could come down to some significant playoff implications potentially. How do you feel about this, especially you being a Cowboys fan?
Good thing it's not a pivotal division game because the Eagles are going to run away with this division. So honestly, it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like generally, I don't like divisional games on Thursday Night Football, even early in the season, because there's so much randomness. But I think there's a couple reasons why this game makes sense. First of all, Dak Prescott and Jalen Hurts just haven't played each other. I think one time they've faced each other over the last 3 seasons. So having them in week one, like kind of guarantees that both guys are going to be on the field, you would think theoretically. And then the second reason is the Cowboys have a pretty low win total this year, 7.5. I don't think the NFL wanted to put those games at the back end of the schedule, in week 14, 15, 16, like they did last year. And the Cowboys were out of playoff contention. Dak Prescott was injured. So putting those teams together on Thursday Night Football to kick off the year at least guarantees that it's going to be somewhat competitive.
Bet the over. I mean, they're not getting under that. If Dak plays half a season or more, they're going to be over that, I think. And so I would have to think, just looking at history these past couple of years, maybe this is something that favors Dallas, though. Maybe this is something that you personally should be rooting for. Cowboys have outscored their opponent in the week one opener 73-17 over the past 2 years. They beat the Giants 40-0
against the Giants, right? So that
but even last year against Cleveland, it was a 33-17 whopping. And so Cowboys have come out swinging recently, but something's got to give because their last 2 games against the Eagles have been atrociously bad. I mean, they've been blown out by 3 scores each of those games.
Yeah, I think the Cowboys scored a total of 13 points in those 2 games because Dak Prescott didn't play. It was Cooper Rush who played both of those games. I will say one of the stats that we got this morning, over the last 20 years, when you have the defending Super Bowl champion playing in this first game of the year, they're 15-5, and they've covered in most of these contests. Philadelphia, they're a big time favorite in this game, and they should be. But I also understand the idea or the logic from other people that think, why not put a lesser game on Thursday Night Football week one? Because you're going to get people watching regardless. Why use up this big time moneymaker in the Cowboys and Eagles? But again, I just think this is maybe this is what the Philadelphia Eagles requested. They wanted to play Dallas to open the season, have it be a big time stage against their biggest rival. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case here either. But a pretty interesting week one contest, but I don't think we're going to get a very good game.
Yeah, it's so early to go and make predictions for this game when we have yet to see everything unfold this summer. But I think this is going to be a close game. I really do. I think Cowboys are going to give them a run for their money. And maybe that's part of the intrigue there too, knowing it's a divisional contest, although some of these just tend to be blowouts. It's just so fluky this early in the year, but there is reason to tune in. Even if you're a casual football fan, the Cowboys have George Pickens now to pair with CeeDee Lamb. They're both teams are going to have healthy quarterbacks. We can assume, like we said, but an interesting contest to put in that window. But yeah, kind of like you're talking about, Marcus, like why not just go with like any run of the mill game? Is it just to try to hype up everybody for the NFL season?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And there's only so many games that the NFL was going to put in that spot. And like one of the games that was obvious was Eagles, Lions. But I wouldn't be surprised if the NFL is saving that game for later in the season, maybe anticipating that these 2 teams could be competing for the number 1 seed. I just think they looked at Dallas and felt like, you know what, this is two big time brands, two of our most important NFL franchises. Let's just get this game out of the way early, and we'll save some of those other premier matchups for later in the season.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of how this thing goes down, who wins this game, whether it's a close game or not, I just don't agree with putting divisional games this early. I know the NFL does it for hype. I would prefer to see those games come later in the year. Give it a couple of weeks to kind of get warmed up. These are basically preseason games anymore. We used to play a lot of preseason. Sometimes you'd play 5 preseason games. You had the Hall of Fame game. Now it's almost nothing, and these starters aren't even going to see the field. Like Dak probably will play almost nothing in the preseason, then come in and play this week 1 game that could be more important than we think. Maybe Dallas ends up being a 9-win team, and you say, oh man, maybe if they would have played the Eagles a little bit later in the season. I mean, maybe that won't be the case here.
Probably not.
But just put these later on where you get your time, your team a little bit of time to warm up. That's how I feel anyway about it. Let's keep the Cowboys discussion rolling from the season opener to the big NFL news that happened this past week, which was the George Pickens trade. Now, the Cowboys reportedly tried to trade for Pickens during the draft, offer the Steelers a 4th-round pick. Apparently, they weren't done, and the Steelers weren't either. A lot of people thought, the Steelers community especially, because I'm really plugged in there, they thought that this Pickens thing was going to go away after the draft. Well, the Steelers didn't like the offer. They are sticking with Pickens. They're going to ride out the rest of his rookie contract, which is just this year. That was not the case. I mean, apparently, they were intrigued by the idea of moving him away. And from what it sounds like, those inside the facility, players, coaching staff, they're not all torn up about this. Marcus, you being a Cowboys fan, and we've had so many discussions over the past couple of years about Pickens, how do you feel about this trade?
Personally, I have very mixed opinions because I'm not sure I would want to be in the George Pickens business and having to deal with some of the distractions that happen day in and day out. But for the Cowboys, it does make sense. They've been hunting a number 2 receiver for a while now. They were interested in Cooper Kupp. Once the price tag got to $15 million, they were out. They were interested in Tetairoa McMillan. That would have been the pick at number 12. He goes 8 to the Carolina Panthers. They were hoping that Luther Burden was going to fall to them in round 2. He goes a couple picks ahead of them. So they've been wanting a number 2 receiver, but they weren't going to reach in the draft for one. So they just didn't draft one at all. They weren't going to overpay for one in free agency. And then you get to the post-draft, and they like their roster quite a bit outside of that number 2 receiver. And that's why they made the trade for George Pickens. They think a 2026 3rd-round pick on top of a 2027 5th-round pick is a worthwhile risk. And I have a hard time disagreeing because you're only going to be renting George Pickens for 7 months, 8 months. And if it goes poorly, you move on. It's a 3rd-round pick. Mm-hmm. But if it works out well and you get a 1B to pair with CeeDee Lamb, who's your 1A, now all of a sudden you've got one of the best wide receiver duos in the league with a hopefully top 10, top 12 quarterback and an improved offensive line. Maybe that's enough to get you back into the playoffs.
Marcus, this could go very well for the Cowboys, or it could go very poorly. I'm not so sure if there's going to be an in-between. Having watched this guy over the past 3 seasons, and the talent is undeniable. Like, Pickens is an exceptionally rare athlete in terms of the acrobatic ability, body contortion, catching traffic, sideline ability, like all that kind of stuff he can do at an elite level. It's just, there will be games that he decides that he doesn't want to play. And for me, watching him last year, obviously watched all the broadcast live, and then the following morning go and watch the broadcast again. And then I go and watch the all 22. And the moment that did it for me, the moment that I was completely done with George Pickens, ironically enough, was the Sunday Night Football game against the Cowboys with the 90 minutes of rain delays. When the Steelers finally took the field, you watch the all 22, the sky footage there, and you see this guy just dogging on routes. Like, he is just not running. He's not trying hard. One route comes to my mind specifically where he's running like this deep drag across the middle, and he's jogging. He doesn't give Justin Fields, who was a quarterback at the time, a window to throw the football. Lets Trayvon Diggs close in right on him. He just doesn't care at times. And then I think about the year before that, Marcus, the Indianapolis Colts game. The Steelers are near the goal line. Jalen Warren's trying to run in for a touchdown. Pickens isn't even blocking the guy in front of him. Gets Warren stuffed at the goal line. Like, these are the situations where it's like, Where are you? Why are you not selling out for the team? And I think that's why the players are okay with this. You're not hearing them all distraught about this trade. I think it was good for the locker room and could potentially be bad for Dallas's locker room.
Oh yeah, I mean the concerns are obvious, and you laid them out. And we've had several reports about him being fined over $200,000 from the Steelers during the 2023 season. Like there are concerns galore, but the Cowboys are looking at it like a couple things. Number one, they look at the George Pickens situation and they see a very talented receiver who maybe you don't trust as a number one route in and route out. But if you pair him with CeeDee Lamb, who can be your high volume guy, and you let George Pickens just be a downfield threat, maybe that's a better football situation for him where he doesn't have to be relied on to get open every single play. And then the other part of this is you look at who George Pickens has played with, not the quarterbacks. I know that's an argument, but Pittsburgh has had a very young offense during the 3 years that he played with the Steelers, where that first year it was Kenny Pickett as a rookie, Najee Harris in the second year, just a lot of young guys on that offense, a very young offensive line. Now he comes to Dallas that has a more experienced team, Dak Prescott going into year 10, CeeDee Lamb, who's really emerged as a leader, and they feel like they can guide him a little bit. CeeDee Lamb's going to take him under his wing and put his locker right next to them. Or let him, will that work? Who knows? But Tommy, I will say everything is set up for Pickens to succeed this year, from the football fit to the quarterback fit, on top of if he has a really good 7 or 8 months and he's just on his best behavior, he could be looking at a monster contract in free agency in 2026. There are no receivers that are going to become available that are anywhere close to his talent level. If he has one good year, he can make upwards of $25 million a year. I would have to assume that Pickens is going to try to do everything right to earn that contract. Will it happen? I don't know. But if he's ever going to have a breakout year, it's going to be this year.
Yeah, there's no question he landed in a perfect situation in Dallas where Dak can get him the ball, CeeDee just destroying defensive backs from the slot. And so he's going to have some favorable matchups. There's no question. But even if he has a big year, let's call it the best year of his career. In year 2, I think for the Steelers, he had over 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. Let's say he gets 1,200 yards, 6 to 8 touchdowns for Dallas this year. But there's antics along the way. He says the wrong things continuously to the media in the locker room. He is quitting on his team on the field at times, which we saw it for 3 straight seasons. I don't expect to see it any differently, even knowing he's going into that contract. He's just one of those guys. And so if those things happen again for a 4th straight season for the Steelers, you can even go back to his Georgia days if you want to. But in the NFL, if they happen for a 4th straight season, knowing the market was already remarkably low on Pickens and that teams were out on him back in the 2022 NFL draft, will the bidding war get high in free agency? I know it only takes 2 to tango, but I don't know how big of a contract this guy is going to get if the antics continue at all in Dallas.
Probably not. And this is where for Pickens, the production matters, but everything else probably matters more, right? Like if the Cowboys are coming out of the season saying, hey, we could have got Pickens more involved. We're a little bit disappointed with the numbers, but he was, the character was way better than we ever anticipated. That's probably going to get him paid more than what you suggested, where 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns, but a distraction off the field. That's why this is such a big opportunity for Pickens. Show that you're growing as a person, showing that you're maturing as a professional. If you can do that, and again, let's say the numbers are modest. Let's say it's 800 yards and 5 touchdowns. We just saw Tutu Atwell and Diami Brown make $10 million a year in free agency with far worse numbers. The numbers are going to matter, but he could still get paid a lot of money just on his talent if he matures as a person.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said, Marcus. It is a worthwhile gamble because it's not you're not giving up the fort for this. If it works out and Pickens gets paid, you'll get a comp pick back, knowing that Dallas just, for whatever reason, hates spending money in free agency and they've got other people to pay. They'll get something back in return. You're probably not going to get what you paid for him if Dallas does some spending or if Pickens still has the antics. But you can get a legitimate wide receiver too if he can keep his head on straight. Let's look at this from the Steelers' perspective now. And did it make sense in the situation there? And I've heard arguments on both sides. Some people saying, well, you had Metcalf and you had Pickens. This could have been a good offense. You could have set yourself up for success and at least given yourself a chance to snap that 8-year, streak without a playoff win. My perspective, I'm thinking about the future already. I'm not thinking about 2025. Unfortunately, if you're a Steelers fan, you're listening, just this team is probably not going to go anywhere in 2025. Their quarterback situation is currently the worst in the league, and it's only going to be average at best, even if Aaron Rodgers signs here. So knowing that, I think the long ball play is more important. And I like that the Steelers were able to get a third and a fifth round for a future 2027 sixth round pick out of George Pickens. I would sign up for that 10 times out of 10, knowing what we just witnessed from him last year. And we didn't even talk about the colossal collapse of Pickens in the season finale against the Bengals, where he was just atrociously bad. Like, he just has those games sometimes where you wonder what he's doing out there. I think in that one, he was targeted 6 times and had 1 catch for 0 yards. Like,
that's why he can't be a number 1 receiver, or not. Yeah. He can't, but he hasn't been that to date. That's why he's always profiled as a high upside wide receiver 2, because that's what wide receiver 2s do. They have these peaks and valleys games, and you can't have that from your wide receiver 1. So from a football sense, it makes a lot more sense for him to be paired up with somebody else rather than playing next to Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and so when you look at the Steelers situation now, their wide receiver room without Pickens, it's like, all right, you essentially swapped DK Metcalf for Pickens. Metcalf's a little bit older. He's going to be 27. He's 27 years old, more proven. Still has a few issues of his own, but nothing like what you have with Pickens. So you're getting a more stable player, one that you've paid. We knew the Steelers weren't going to pay Pickens. That was never on the table. They weren't going to hand DK Metcalf $150 million and then the very next year turn around and give Pickens his bag as well. That just wasn't happening, especially when people questioned the Metcalf trade to begin with, because they were so similar in terms of play style. So now you essentially swapped one for the other, but the rest of your wide receiver room now is a 33-year-old Robert Woods. It's Roman Wilson, who's played 5 career snaps, and there's been some mixed reviews with him. There's Calvin Austin, who is extremely undersized, has shown flashes, but hasn't been consistent. Like, what do you make of this receiving room now? And we probably look at it like, well, this team now has either a very low end wide receiver 1 in Metcalf, a high end wide receiver 2, whatever you want to label him as, and they still need another receiver alongside of him. If you're a Steelers fan, are you worried about the receiver room this year, or are you kind of like me, where you're thinking about this in terms of the long haul?
I mean, I think both can be true. I mean, you can be worried about it. I mean, I think the receiver room is better than it was last year, because I like Metcalf more than I like Pickens, but it's significantly more expensive than it was a year from, right? And you're paying him about $30 million per year. But yes, their wide receiver 2 issue is a problem. And if Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback, you're going to have to go out and get a better wide receiver 2. We saw the Jets have problems with this last year. Even with Garrett Wilson and some of the other playmakers they had, the offense just wasn't good enough. So they went out and traded multiple picks for Devontae Adams. But at the same time, Tommy, I understand the thought process. When you don't have a franchise quarterback, the only thing that matters is getting one. And the best way to get one is to stockpile draft picks, so that when one becomes available, or that you're in position to trade up, you have the resources to go out and get one. Having an extra 3rd and 5th round pick isn't going to be the difference in the Steelers getting their quarterback or not. However, those picks can help you fill in the picks that you're going to lose if you need to trade up and go get one, right? If you're trading multiple 1st round picks, now you have the top 100 draft capital to kind of fill in the rest of your roster. So I think it's a good long-term move for the Steelers, but there's no doubt their team is worse now than it was a week ago.
Yeah, it 100% is. And maybe that swings at a game or two, even not having that much less explosion on your offense. But I do like how the front office has played this offseason. You talked about stockpiling picks. They let guys walk away that were overpriced and that weren't going to be part of the future. And now looking at next year's draft, after the George Pickens trade, the Steelers have a 1st, a 2nd, 3 3rds, 2 4ths, 2 5ths. They've got draft capital to work with. And that gives them then the ammunition they need to go up and get a quarterback. It's, of course, you can always use draft capital over the next 2 years after that as well. So like you said, nothing else is going to matter until they resolve that. That's the unfortunate nature of the business here. So knowing that this was a 1-year rental on a team that currently has Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson as a quarterback, maybe they'll get a 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers, just not going to get them where they want to go this year anyway.
I will say there does seem to be a disconnect from the front office and the coaching staff, and I'm not sure which one's which. I think I've got an idea, but you go out and you
Mhm.
sign Darius Slay, the oldest cornerback in the NFL, to
Yeah.
a 1-year deal. You're going to pay TJ Watt this offseason. Cam Hayward's got a big deal. This is still an older team, and if you sign Aaron Rodgers, he'll be the oldest starting quarterback in the league. It still feels like they're trying to have two paths here of trying to get their
Mhm.
quarterback next year, drafting high, but also being competitive this year. It's really hard to walk both of those paths. Eventually, the Steelers are going to have to decide to go one direction or the other, because if they're a playoff team and maybe they win a playoff game for the first time in 8 years, now you're drafting in the 20s, and it's really hard to go from 20 to the top 5 to go get your quarterback. Whereas if I think maybe there's some more organizational clarity that, hey, we know we need to start bottoming out a little bit, it's a lot easier to go from 6 to 2 than to go from 20 to 4.
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers want to have their cake and eat it too, unfortunately, because they are kind of torn in terms of philosophy. And the philosophy is something I've disagreed with since the final 5 years of Kevin Colbert. Like, they have been doing this wrong. And now you've got Mike Tomlin in the latter stages of his coaching career. He's been here forever. He undoubtedly wants to win playoff games. The front office may want to go a different direction and may view the quarterback as more valuable. I think they all want to win. I think everybody
Yes,
wants
of
to
course.
win. But knowing, and the fans even know this, like, from our perspective, sitting here behind a computer screen, we can see that this team needs to get a franchise quarterback to get themselves back on track. Having an old aging veteran in a 1-year stopgap situation isn't going to get you where you want to go. And so I do agree. It's like, what do you do at this point, though? Do you ship away TJ Watt and Cam Hayward? That's be very uncharacteristic of the Steelers, but it would be a play for the future.
No, and it just this two timeline strategy, it hasn't really worked in
Mm-hmm.
NFL or the NBA. Eventually, Pittsburgh's going to have to pick one, but the worst case scenario would be going right down the middle. And unfortunately, I think that's where
Yeah.
we're heading right now, where you're right back into that 9-8 range, where not quite good enough to compete for a Super Bowl, but not quite bad enough to have a top 10 pick. I do think we'll see what the Steelers do with the rest of their moves this offseason. If they go out and trade premium draft capital for, name your receiver, DJ Moore, Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Dubs, I think that will indicate that they're wanting to win now, maybe more than looking forward to the future. But we'll see.
Yeah, no, you've said it though. Like, if they are picking 21 or 24, let's say they win a playoff game next year, and now all of a sudden there are teams at the top of the draft that need a quarterback. It's a good quarterback class, whatever. And you're looking at getting like the third, fourth, fifth best quarterback in the class. Like, that's not really, you don't want to settle. I mean, this team has already settled so much at the quarterback position. It's going to cost you infinitely more to move from that spot to go get a top 10 pick to get a quarterback.
Here's what Steeler fans should be rooting for this year. They should be rooting for teams like the Titans and the Falcons and teams like that already have their quarterbacks on rookie contracts to be some of the worst teams in the league. Because
Yes.
if they hold the number 1, number 2, number 3 pick, those are going to be the teams that are going to be willing to trade. But if it's Cleveland and the Colts and the Giants that are holding those top picks, or the Saints, who we'll talk about in a little
Yeah.
bit, that's where it's going to make it really hard, no matter where they're at in the draft, to go up and get a quarterback.
100%. And so already post draft, we know the teams that we should be rooting for in terms of how it's going to affect the Steelers in the draft next year. Marcus, if you just had to give a grade to both of these teams here for the George Pickens trade, was this truly a win-win scenario? The Steelers dump a troubled receiver, they get draft capital so they can rebuild for the future, and Dallas gets a legitimate bona fide wide receiver too, that at least gives them a chance now that Dak is in his 30s to win right now.
So I'll give Pittsburgh a B plus for the trade, because they got more than I thought they'd get out of a trade. Now, the bad part of this is they waited till after the draft. I think if they could have gotten a deal done before the draft, maybe they would have been able to go get a receiver. Maybe that couldn't replace Pickens 1-for-1, but at least gives you another option. Overall, I think they did extremely well. As for Dallas, I'll say it's a B minus. I think it's worthy. It's a worthwhile trade for them because they desperately needed another receiver to pair with CeeDee Lamb. There is some risk here, and I think the people that are assuming that the Cowboys are going to get a comp pick here no matter what, that's a little foolish to me. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the best way to look at this is, Look at Deontay Johnson last year, who the Panthers traded for. I think they had the same philosophy. Hey, let's trade a late round pick, or let's trade Dante
Mhm.
Jackson for Deontay Johnson. If it doesn't work out, he'll leave. We'll get a comp pick. Deontay Johnson is on his 4th team since being traded. So that doesn't always work out. I think Pickens has every incentive to make this work, but there is some risk here for Dallas that they're going to have to absorb, and I think they're okay with it.
If for whatever reason the Steelers just have that track record, I think 6 receivers now traded over the past handful of years since Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant, Chase Claypool, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson. Like they know typically when to hit the eject button and get you out of the organization. And then basically, in most cases, you fall off a cliff after that. That might not be the case with Pickens, still very much in the prime of his career. He's 24 years old. But I just seen this guy too much. I've seen him quit on his team too much.
Can I give you this one little caveat? If
Yeah.
you look at the teams that made the trades for the Steelers receivers, most of them went to pretty rough quarterback
Mm-hmm.
situations.
It's true.
Martavis went to the Raiders when the Raiders were really bad with Derek Carr. That one would have worked, but Martavis got suspended. You had Antonio Brown getting traded to the Raiders. Same thing, Derek Carr. That one was rough. Chase Claypool went to play with Justin Fields, who was a young quarterback. It does feel like this is the best football fit that we've seen of all these Steeler wide receiver trades. Santonio Holmes went to the Jets with, I think it was Mark Sanchez at the time. For that reason, I am a little bit more optimistic. But yeah, if Mike Tomlin gives up on a receiver, generally there's a good reason why.
Yeah, and so I would give the Steelers the same grade. I would do a B+ for them for the reason that you already mentioned that came after the draft, but they were able to unload and they were able to do so at probably a higher price tag in return than most people expected they would get. And Cowboys, I would give them a C+. And I think the biggest reason is because they were bidding against themselves. There was no other team. It was Dallas that came and offered that 4th round pick. Every other team was a 6th or later, right? And then they come in and say, well, let's up our own offer that we already made you and we'll get this thing done. And so I think the fact that they were bidding against themselves and knowing that Pickens is only going to be a rental, it might be worse if he was an actual extension.
I just say, actually, I think a Reynolds a better outcome for them. And we should mention that's something we did talk about. The Cowboys and George Pickens have already come to an understanding that they're going to let this thing play out. They want to see it through. And honestly, for both sides, it makes total sense. And I think if this was a situation where the Cowboys were going to pay George Pickens, let's say it's one more year at $15 million, I would feel a lot worse about it. The fact that you're paying him nothing on the cap, but you're giving up a 3rd round pick makes it a little bit more palatable for me.
Yeah, no, and I get that. And so as long as you are okay, and if your team is in that window, you say, I can stomach the draft capital, I can stomach a day 2 pick to give myself a legitimate chance. And then that's what Pickens will do for Dallas. He will elevate the offense that way as long as he can keep his head on straight. And that's a big if, I think, especially for those of us who have watched him closely over the past several years. All right, let's transition from the George Pickens talk to the biggest recent news around the NFL, and that is Derek Carr's retirement. His last play, unfortunately, in the NFL came when he was just skydiving, being Superman, jumping over, injured that shoulder, and unfortunately, his career is done. It didn't come, though, before he made a butt ton of money. I mean, this guy made $205 million in his career. I think he's the 9th richest player over the past decade in the NFL. I think Warren Stapp had that stat tweeted out there. But the irony of this, Marcus, is he made so much money being a quarterback who had a career record of 77 and 92 with just one trip and an early exit from the playoffs. Kind of Kirk Cousins light career path, if you will, but still leaves behind a pretty good legacy, 41,000 passing yards in his career, put up some really good numbers. Ironically, his first 3 years was the most like inspirational, like maybe this guy could be something. And then everything kind of leveled off after that for Derek Carr.
It's a really weird career because you mentioned the first year he was a 2nd round pick. Most of these 2nd round picks don't start off their careers well. And he did. He had a fantastic rookie season. And then in year 2, he made the leap that everybody was anticipating, right? 32 touchdowns, 4,000 passing yards. He was a legit MVP candidate in 2015. And then he gets hurt in the final game of the season before they go into the playoffs. Connor Cook has to start for them. And it was just a disaster. That was probably their best chance to make some noise. And then from that point on, the Raiders really struggled as an organization. And when things were finally starting to turn around in 2021, his number one receiver, Henry Ruggs, has the tragic accident and spends the rest of his career in jail. John Gruden is head coach, where he was thriving under John Gruden, gets fired midseason, and yet they still make the playoffs. And then after a while, the Raiders feel like they need to go in a different direction. They need to get younger and cheaper. He goes to the Saints. And then the Saints, just as a team, as a franchise, as an organization, have hit rock bottom. And it's not all Derek Carr's fault. He certainly didn't help the situation. But I do wonder, if you replay Derek Carr's career like 10 times, if that he doesn't end up, doing much better 7, 8 of those 10 times. Still, he was a good quarterback. I don't think he was ever a top 12 quarterback in the NFL, but just a really good quarterback that had some unfortunate luck. And with his injury, having to retire this early, I was going to say, for somebody that has started this many games, to retire at age 34 is kind of surprising, but it is what it is. And now the Saints are hoping that Tyler Shuck can be their franchise quarterback.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a second. Carr, I mean, we know he had the 4 Pro Bowls. The Pro Bowlers are whatever. But he was pretty good early on. There was a lot to get excited about. I felt like in the first 3-4 years of his career, he had the size, he had the arm. My biggest holdup, though, with Carr, just watching him over the years, is like, all right, this guy is never doing more to push the ball down the field. He's just not. He just doesn't have that X factor to his game like he was doing. A lot of game managing type stuff, even in the years that he had high volume. But he always felt like, to me, he's kind of like, is this a guy that's like in the Andy Dalton limbo, where you are a good starter, you just aren't great by any stretch of the imagination, and you can't get it done, which in some ways, Marcus, is almost kind of the worst quarterback situation that you can have. It's not Carr's fault. He's still a good football player. It just puts you in the middle of the pack.
And I think some of that was the fault of the offensive coordinators that he had, playing in a lot of West Coast offenses that require him to get rid of the ball quickly. And then he just didn't have the playmakers until he got Henry Ruggs. And that's why that 2021 season is so disappointing, because you saw the flashes in 2020 when they beat the Chiefs and Henry Ruggs had 2 big touchdowns down the field. And then Henry Ruggs catches a game winner against the Jets. And then he catches a long bomb for a touchdown to beat the Steelers earlier that year. To lose Ruggs and Gruden in the same year, I think that was a crossroads for Derek Carr's career. It never got back on track. Again, it's a really unfortunate career. I don't think he ever would have been, he was never going to be the Joe Burrow or the Lamar Jackson or the Josh Allens. But I think in a better situation, we could have seen him win a lot of games, but he just never ended up in the right franchise with the right organization. That's a shame. But again, $200 million will make up for it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think he's pretty pleased with the career that he's had. And it's unfortunate that he went out the way that he did, sacrificing his body like that. But good career overall. Let's talk about the Saints situation, though. And I hate to even look at it this way, Marcus, but I think if you're a Saints fan and you know the financial nightmare that they've been in over the years, you know that their team is, quite frankly, not all that talented right now. They're lacking weapons galore. Chris Olave's got all the concussion stuff. You didn't have a very bright future, to put it that way. Derek Carr, now you get rid of a 33-year-old quarterback, 34-year-old quarterback now suddenly retires. Maybe you find yourself in the best situation possible, where it's like, I can start Tyler Shuck all season long, who's going to be 26 years old in September, I believe. And we'll see how this thing goes. Maybe he's got it. He certainly has traits for the quarterback position. Maybe he doesn't, and we're going to suck, and we can draft one of the best quarterbacks in next year's class. So maybe Saints fans viewing this kind of as a win-win.
I don't think Saints fans are all that heartbroken. I mean, I think they feel bad because Derek Carr got injured and they don't want to see their quarterback get injured. But I don't think Derek Carr was the most popular Saints quarterback anyways. They get some cap relief here, which that's going to help. This has been a team that has pushed so much money into the future. So getting out of Derek Carr's contract, getting some cap relief does help. And now everything's open for Tyler Shuck to start a significant amount of games this year. We'll see if he's the week 1 starter. I kind of think he will be. Maybe we see Spencer Rattler in that role, but this very much feels to me the way that the Houston Texans were back in 2021, 2022, where they drafted Davis Mills in the 3rd round. and they let Davis Mills go out and start a bunch of games with the idea that, hey, if it works out, great.
Mm-hmm.
But if he doesn't develop, he's going to help us get a top pick. And what did that ultimately lead to for the Texans? CJ Stroud, who has now won back-to-back division titles. So I think that's the path forward for the Saints. They've got a first-year head coach who signed a long-term deal. They've got Mickey Loomis, the GM, who will never be fired. I think for the first time in 20 years, the Saints are actually looking at this the right way and actually developing a plan to get them back on track.
Yeah, I absolutely love that thought process for a team, especially in the situation where they are, where they've got a whole new regime starting here. Take your lumps with Tyler Shough. And if it goes well, then maybe you have something there. And if not, like you said, we're going to get a top quarterback. You can effectively hit the reset button on this franchise beginning this year into next year's draft. And then you can start doing things the way that you should do them to build from the roster from the studs up. And so I do think that it's ultimately, this is going to benefit the team. The Saints were not going to have a chance to compete for a Super Bowl or anything wild like that. Even if Derek Carr was fully healthy and playing at his peak, I don't think they would have had a chance this year. So,
and I do want to add in real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
They didn't make the Tyler Shough selection without knowing kind of what was going on with Derek Carr.
Yeah,
now, maybe they were surprised that he retired. I'm not even sure that's the case, but I think they knew like Derek Carr probably has played the last snap with us, and that's why they made the Shough selection. And honestly, I think the Shough pick makes even more sense now. They could have drafted a quarterback like Jalen Milroe at that spot or traded up for Jackson Dart, but those guys need to sit and develop and watch. Whereas Tyler Shough, he's ready to play right now, and that's what you need for the Saints. You need somebody that can come in, give you competent quarterback play, help develop some of those other young guys you have on the roster, help develop your offensive line. I think the Saints kind of knew what was coming down the pipe with Derek Carr, and that's why we shouldn't be surprised with the pick at all.
Yeah, and you and I talked about Tyler Shough specifically before the draft, where it's like, all right, this guy needs to go to a situation where he can play right away. You can't wait on a guy that's going to be as old as he is and redshirt him a year or two down the line. Like, it just doesn't do you any good. You need to find out who he is right now. He does have the tools. He's got some mobility. He's got a live arm. So the Saints will soon find out if this is a guy, or maybe he'll take the Will Levis career path. And you're like, all right, this is an older guy with tools and he just doesn't have it. We're going to reset and move on. And it doesn't hurt you all that bad.
It's a second round pick. Like, if it doesn't work out, it's a second round pick. Nobody's losing sleep over a second round pick. But if it works out, imagine what kind of situation the Saints are suddenly in. Now you've got your franchise quarterback on a young deal, or on a young contract. You can start to develop. I think for the first time in a long time, I'm feeling optimistic about the outlook for the Saints.
I was going to say the exact same thing. And it wasn't since like the later days of Drew Brees where it's like this team had a chance. And since then, they've been backloading contracts. They've been keeping old players. They've been doing everything they can to try to keep their head above water. And it just hasn't been working. And so I think that you're going to get answers one way or another if you're a Saints fan this year, which is exactly what you want. You can't stay in that limbo, lower level limbo anymore than what they were. All right. We go live on the Stacking the Box show every Monday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. Make sure you join us here. You can follow Marcus on X at Marcus_Mosher. You can follow me on X at Tommy Jaggi. Thanks again for listening to Stacking the Box No Huddle Show.